It's all part of it. Aw, sucky sucky. Lucky me. Somebody at the belly.
Every time. Every time. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, my. But she held it up like it was a blessing.
It is.
Oh.
I go around fixing cupcakes myself.
Some of y'all aren't too sure what red velvet cream. Some of them don't know. And I'm gonna have them licking their screens. We're gonna connect the dots across the diaspora with this one here. We're like, what that is? Don't worry about that. And the Lord just said it again. Oh my, 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 my. Y'all raise the low country clap for Miss Cheryl. Miss Cheryl got the Lord in her hand. Look at this head, look at this head. Woo! Yeah. Okay, wait, I need that one there. I got it down pat. I got that there. Damn. And then,
And look at that.
from the hands of Miss Cheryl said she got red velvet, cream cheese pie, no, sour cream pound cake, tropical cupcake, red velvet cupcake. Just go. Ooh, hold up. I'm on her coat. I need to stop. Oh, come on. I need to stop. Oh, I'm so glad I got another camera running. No, I keep a webcam running because
Give me today my daily bread. Help me to walk alone ahead. Though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no love. Oh, my smile, my mind, reassure me I don't need no one. There's more than my mind. Set on loving me. With my mind, set on loving me. With my mind, set on loving me. With my mind, set on loving me. I'm not lonely. I'm alone, and I'm holy by my own. I'm lonely, I'm alone, and I'm holy by my own. The valleys may come, the love remains, the winter may not. Hey, the map of your heart, the temple you keep, you're all that you say. I'm made. The madness may come, the love remains, the winter may say. I'm made. The map of your heart, the temple you keep, you're all that you say. I'm walk through the darkest valley. I say, I'm my smile, my mind, you show me your eyes. There's more than with my mind. Set on loving me. With my mind, set on loving me. With my mind, set on loving me. With my mind, set on loving me. I'm not lonely. I'm alone, and I'm lonely by my own. I'm not lonely, I'm alone, and I'm lonely by my own. My cup is full of what I got is enough. Nobody completes me, don't mess with my soul. My cup is full of what I got is enough. Nobody completes me, so mess with my love. My cup is full of what I got is enough. Nobody completes me, so mess with my love. My cup is full of what I got is enough. Nobody completes me, so mess with my love. My cup is full of what I got is enough. Nobody completes me, don't mess with my stuff. My cup is full of what I got is enough. Nobody completes me, don't mess with my love. Surely, 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 goodness and mercy shall follow me. La 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 la, shall follow me. La 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 la, shall follow me.
So I didn't know if the video was going to freak me out or make me feel more chill, and I'm somewhere in the middle. But thank you all so much for being here this evening. I'm so moved and honored. Before we get started, because the point of this evening is to focus on our own healing and healing ancestral trauma, we wanted to take a couple of seconds to welcome and invite our ancestral spirit in this space, this healing space with us. So don't think too hard. Think of a name. Think of 6 names. You can whisper it. You can think it to yourself. You can say it out loud. You can follow it with an ashe. But we just want to welcome our ancestral spirits within this healing space. So I'm going to start with Dr. Consuela Francis, my cousin Monifa Adeyemi, and my grandmother Elizabeth Sheila. Just call a name out. We gotta do it one at a time. Just bring them in here.
Welcome. So happy to see everybody in the place. So excited and grateful that you all took the time to come bear witness to this project. I'm going to introduce our panel. We're actually all going to speak. But my name is Drew, and I am a dialogue facilitator, and a mother, and a makeup artist, and I studied women and gender studies and sociology, and I like to do things like this, like bring our stories to life in ways that are healing, and that is why I'm here this evening.
My name is Jessica, and I'm a student at the College of Charleston, and I'm a senior, about to graduate. And I'm a computing in the arts major and a studio arts major and an arts management minor. And I'm in the middle of writing a book called Guardians of Masculinity that's AfroFuturist.
Hi, good evening. My name is Lisa Young. I am a professor at the College of Charleston in English and African American Studies. I do research and work on Black women's activism, or more specifically Black women's health activism, as it relates to environmental racism and all the things that come along with that. And more recently, I've gotten into a topic of epigenetics. So how does the environment literally change the structure of our DNAs, and how does something like stress, preclude that as well? So Afrofuturism is a topic that I'm interested in exploring, and Jessica was one of my students in my first Afrofuturism class. My name is Sara. I am a public historian, cultural history interpreter, Afrofuturist. My work looks at Gullah Geechee women, both enslaved and free. I look at sexual freedom. I like to say Black joy, Black affirmations. I am very passionate about interpreting history in a way that makes us aware that we are the futures that they manifested. So that's it.
So to begin tonight, the first thing we want to do is contextualize Afrofuturism. We're kind of going to talk about what Afrofuturism is, how we make meaning of Afrofuturism, and how it connects to this idea of healing and wellness. Here we are.
So I actually had a slide. I'm going to actually just pull it up right quick. So I had a slide that would kind of like give a little bit more in depth, a presentation that would give a little bit more in depth in terms of what Afrofuturism is and what it means. But because I taught this class on Afrofuturism as a way of getting my students to really understand it, I came up with these 10 tenets or pillars of Afrofuturism. So there are a couple scholars in the academy who define Afrofuturism, and they use all of these big words, for lack of a better term, that make Afrofuturism almost illegible. And so there is a scholar called Mark Derry. He's actually a white cultural theorist who who first invented the term Afrofuturism in the 80s. And even though this term comes about like in the 80s, that doesn't mean that Afrofuturism as an idea is new. And so he says that Afrofuturism is using technoculture, or all those things that we kind of symbolize or think about when it comes to technology, as a way of imagining new mindscapes and landscapes. And then there's a scholar named Natasha Womack who wrote this book on Afrofuturism, and she says that Afrofuturism is using things like your imagination, science fiction, and also all of those things that are around you in the environment to construct a new identity and possibilities of liberation. The definition that I came up with for myself and for others, just as a way of making Afrofuturism something that is meaningful, is just to think of it as African-centered or Afrocentric forms of knowledge that allow you to resist colonization, resist oppression, and to form new ideas and to form new worlds for yourself, right? And so the first thing that I point out, or I like to talk about, is this idea that Africa is always present. So it always harkens back to the motherland. Even if you take something like the Rastafarian flag or the Garvey flag, what is it about an object that you see? What is it about it that makes it black, right? There's something about it. Sometimes it's the drum, right? Sometimes it is a Dinka symbol. I don't know how many of you all are familiar with Dinka symbols, but a Dinka symbols are these images in West African culture that have some kind of intentional meaning. Sometimes they're embedded on clothing as a way of giving a certain message. So one of the Dinka symbols, and I don't have the slide, but one of the Dinka symbols is the Sankofa. And the Sankofa symbol means to go back and get it, or to know your history, which I think is one of the guiding tenets of Afrofuturism. You must always know your history in order to be able to read Afrofuturist texts or images. The second one is understanding that the ancestral aspect is always present. And when I point this out, like Sara did when she invited the ancestors in, this is nothing that's specific to just African Americans or African cultures, right? Every state, government, country honors or respects their ancestors in certain ways. So whether or not it's the Pledge of Allegiance or singing of the national anthem, you're giving that respect to those who have come before you. And again, the drum can be an ancestral aspect that's present. The third pillar is understanding that there's a timelessness about Afrofuturism, so it's not always about the future. Octavia Butler, who's a very prominent science fiction writer, she has a book called Idris that is dated back to the past, and it's about this woman named Dana who is in present-day America, but time travels back to the antebellum slavery period as a way of figuring out who her ancestors were and discovering a little bit more about her identity, and ultimately that is what helps her to heal. Also, time is not always linear, so a book may not go forward. Sometimes a book may go in all of these different modes, and that's a way of helping you to realize that, you know, things can be happening all at once, even though we live in a world or in a dimension where we can only think of and perceive of them in very linear in a very linear time fashion. The fifth pillar that I came up with is understanding that it's not just about imagining Black people in the future as it is currently, right? So if you imagine Black people in the year 3020 and we look the same way that we look now with the same colonial oppression and the same kinds of racism, then that's not Afrofuturism, because Afrofuturism is about inventing these new worlds, being able to use your mind or different technologies and different information about the world to create new worlds that have different systems or that are ruled and governed in different ways. The sixth pillar was understanding that it's postmodern, and a lot of times when we think of something like postmodern, it means the ability to disrupt something that, you know, that we've always known. So a lot of times we think of Afrofuturism as postmodern because there's this digital technology and this digital component embedded with it, right? But that's not where Afrofuturism begins, first of all. And we must know that anything can be a digital technology in Afrofuturism. So language, the Gullah language or the Gullah culture, that's a technology that has allowed them to communicate different messages, right? If we think about other forms of technology like music or sonic culture can be a different kind of technology. I was going to play some of Sun Ra's music because I think he helps orient our understanding to what different sounds can mean and can do for our experience here. Also, just to kind of think about this idea that Afrofuturism is postmodern. So there's this tendency in American history to say that modern America began with the invention of the steam engine. And the steam engine is what helped us to expand west, it's what helped us to industrialize, it's what helped us to build this modern America, right? So the 1800s is when we became moderns in this country. And there's a cultural theorist who says that actually modernity for Black people began from the moment they left Africa, went on this savage journey across another country or across a body of water to another country, and they emerged on this land in which they were no longer human beings. They were actually, now chattel. And so they had to begin to think of themselves as, or think themselves out of that, kind of oppression. So what did it mean when generations down the line, you no longer, all you know is that you're property and you're chattel slavery. How do you imagine in your mind or otherwise, how do you imagine freedom? And so a lot of work that has been done on early Afrofuturism, if you think about this as not something that begins with digital technology, is reimagining someone like Harriet Tubman as an Afrofuturist. So thinking about how she navigates the stars to be able to get to freedom. Thinking about why is it that she wanted to go to freedom. In her mind, she may have never seen, or she may have never encountered a free Black person. What did it mean for her to construct that image in her mind so that she can use whatever is around her, whatever it is available here on this earth to guide her to a place to get towards that freedom that's in her mind. And so I want to, again, emphasize the fact that it doesn't have to be 3D, it can be very historical. And there are early Afrofuturists who don't even call themselves Afrofuturists, and people who have Afrofuturist sensibilities who may not ascribe to the language. And I'm thinking about people like herbalists or root doctors, right, who know how to make use of the land in very specific ways. The seventh pillar is it disrupts the societal truth. So a lot of times Afrofuturism or Afrofuturist visual imageries can be very disruptive. They can be very political in thought. And it's a way of helping you to understand that what you thought you knew about the world isn't always, it isn't what it seems. In a lot of ways, Blackness has been, and Black culture has been demonized, yet it's a really powerful reorienting to understand that you come from a line that, or come from ancestors who were able to imagine a better world for themselves, and because of that, you are here. Number 8 is gender as a social construct, where race is always salient. So gender may look a different way, and a lot of times, gender is complicated, and gender, there's this balance between masculine and feminine energies and what it means to be masculine and feminine. It takes in the idea that we are always, we hold those two constructs within ourselves. It doesn't always have to be one or the other. And number 9, it can be post-human. So I'm thinking about someone like Janelle Monáe, who uses the cyborg as a way of taking emphasis off her Black body. So even though she's creating a Black world and all of these things about her Blackness, and if you go back to number 1 and 2, right, like you can always tell that this is Black production. The fact that she has erased her Black body, what can we do, or how does that change how we're reading what's happening So this idea of the cyborg as a way of taking the emphasis off of the black body, because as someone like W.B. Du Bois says, when he's talking about double consciousness as this thing in which there's two warring souls or two warring spirits in black bodies where they don't entirely feel African, nor do they entirely feel American, right? And that is what's happening with this post-humanism, taking the effect off of the body. And then finally, as a way of getting my students to kind of like process and understanding or read Afrofuturist imagery a little bit better, I talked about how it's embedded in this black intellectual tradition of signification and symbolism. So you can look at a lot of the signs that are in black, or that are on black Afrofuturist text as a way of better understanding it. So that was just an overview of some of the things that I think can make it easier for people who are new or maybe exploring Afrofuturism to be able to figure out what makes this thing Afrofuturist.
A little bit. We're going to talk a lot about your work, Sara. So Sara put together a powerful thesis, and her research was grounded in ways to heal by looking at the past, which is what made it Afrofuturist. So I want to talk a little bit about what led you to the research, and I know that your work is a part of that, so maybe you could speak a bit about, oh, there we go. Is that what you were, I'm sorry, looking for?
Oh,
Okay.
not these.
It's okay.
So I completed grad school last year, and as I said, my degree was in public history. So I was one of the original 4 interpreters at McLeod Plantation Historic Site on James Island when it opened to the public in 2015. And we were tasked with interpreting the history of slavery from the African American perspective. At the time, we were like the only ones doing it like that, like prioritizing it as opposed to offering African American or the history of the enslaved people as an alternative or, you know, an option or not at all. So in doing so, we were able to create our own tours. In doing the research, I was both blown away and horrified because of this scary stuff. The stuff of slavery is scary stuff. We interpreted from 1851 to 1990, which is actually how long the descendants of enslaved people were living in cabins on that plantation. And you know, you had to be living under a rock. We opened in 2015. During 2015, Walter Scott was murdered. Also, Dylan Roof went into church and murdered our community members. It felt very difficult to interpret the transition to freedom when black people are dying, when we're being beaten and bruised and dying still, and trying to explain, like, look, it's over and here we are. And that didn't feel true. That didn't feel true to me, and I felt very much like, oh, we are deeply impacted by the history, by this history that we're talking about. We're not separated from it at all. So the first research paper I did in my graduate program was titled Our Existence is Resistance, and it looked at enslaved and free Gullah Geechee women during the end of slavery and Reconstruction and how they resisted, how they might have used womanist theory, and obviously womanism was not coined during slavery, but how they might have used the ideology that they were whole people, that they had value, that they loved themselves, that they loved their sisters, that they loved their community, how they might have used that to move themselves forward. Of course, you cannot look at resistance without looking at what they were resisting. And again, it was horrifying. It was horrifying the ways that black women specifically experienced violence from everyone. So this is white supremacist violence as well as intracommunal violence, because that didn't just begin yesterday. That stuff has been happening since we got here. So I was discouraged. I was again validated. I was moved that we managed to exist in the present at all, coming from what we come from. And I remember taking a road trip and listening to an episode of the Friend Zone podcast, and they talked about epigenetics. And epigenetics is defined a lot of different ways, but I look at it as generational trauma, and it is the idea that we pass trauma down. We pass it on to our descendants. The analogy used in another podcast, I'm a podcast junkie, on Being, they said that if our genetics are the computer, then epigenetics is the software, the program, the app. So it's downloaded on top of our genes. And as an example of how this trauma is passed down, at Emory University, they did a study where they conditioned some rats to be terrified of the scent of a cherry blossom plant by pairing the scent with a shock. So after a little while, the rat was terrified of the scent without the shock. And then they bred the rat. And the offspring of the rat was terrified of the scent without ever having that shock or that experience. And so that is how we pass this trauma down, where the rat could detect lower doses of the scent. So if you think about that as it pertains to people and how we might be triggered by something from an experience that our grandmother had, and we're triggered by a more subtle example of the trauma that she experienced. Studies show that trauma can pass in plants and animals up to 14 generations. And at the time that I completed the thesis, which was just last year, I calculated we are about 5 or 6 generations removed from the end of slavery. So not the beginning, the end of it. And so it blew my mind. It also validated me to consider that all of the pain that I feel and I walk with every day is not all my own, that some of it comes from people who were before me. And then you have this horror and you're like, okay, well, what are we gonna do? You know, what do we have power over? How can we change this? How can we heal this? And how can we even consider healing our ancestors? And so that was how I approached the thesis. I didn't know about Afrofuturism when I started the grad program. I was introduced to it by a friend on Twitter, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. And the more that I explored it, the more that I realized that, again, it's something that we've been doing. It's not a new thing. It pre-existed the coining of the term. It pre-existed the English language, you know, and just trying to figure out ways to apply that liberatory framework to our own lives. And also it became very clear to me as a Black public historian that Afrofuturism should be incorporated into the field of public history, because I feel like it is taken for granted by dominant groups that they are the futures their ancestors manifested. And if you think your ancestors didn't exist, or if you think they were slaves, you know, these empty things with no agency, with no mind, with no foresight, then it's like, oh, are we going to exist in the future? But of course we are, because we're here. So
They had to have imagined a future.
absolutely, absolutely.
So can you talk a little bit about this idea of like freedom is no fear? You cited Nina Simone. We actually have that video, I think. You opened the paper.
What do you mean? Same thing as you tell me. No, you tell me. Is that a talking? So just a feeling. It's just a feeling. It's like, how do you tell somebody how it feels to be in love? How are you going to tell anybody who has not been in love how it feels to be in love? You cannot do it to save your life. You can describe things, but you can't tell it. But you know it when it happens. That's what I mean by free. I've had a couple of times on stage when I really felt free. And that's something else. That's really something else. Like I'll tell you what freedom is to me. No fear. I mean, really, no fear. If I could have that half of my life, no fear. Lots of children have no fear. That's the closest way. That's the only way I can describe it. That's not all of it. But
started my thesis with that quote, and I appreciate hearing it again because when I was exploring trauma, I found a doctor who she was explaining trauma, and she essentially said that children are traumatized whenever they fear for their life, their safety, or the life and safety of someone they love. And I would believe that applies to all of us. Additionally, living in a state of constant terror, where you don't know if you or your loved ones are safe, is not a sufficient or sustainable way to exist in the world. That actually breaks down your body step by step until you are no more. And so having Mother Nina Simone define freedom that way made a lot of sense to me. And how might we go about living fearlessly when certainly it feels like there's so much to be afraid of? How do we create, even if only in our minds, a safe place? Because certainly we are freer than our enslaved ancestors were. And yet there is still so much fear. And not knowing if you're safe and not knowing if you're survived, or constantly feeling like somebody wants to take you out is not freedom. And so how might we get to a place of fearlessness? And I'm not speaking to you from a place of fearlessness, but it's something that I want to get to, and I believe I facilitated an artist talk with my mom a couple of weeks ago, and I asked her what freedom meant to her, and her response was very similar in that she wanted to be able to move through the world without worrying about what other people thought, without worrying about trying to contort herself into the definitions of others. And that is what I desire for all of us, to be able to exist in our wholeness, in our fullness, to be able to embrace all the mess and all the beauty, and be in alignment with our divinity. And I always like to say, I'm not speaking like I have the answers. I'm speaking like these are my considerations.
Yeah, but you are articulating this thing, and I think it's so interesting how when we gather in these spaces where we are together and we're safe enough to sort of explore our interior realities, I think it's fascinating how so many of us share the same feelings, this same sort of terror, right? And I think that, like, one of the things that you said was you spoke to like how hard it is to articulate it, like how it's almost a privilege, like this right here, to be able to say, okay, we're going to talk about this. We're going to invite people, we're going to talk about this, but the fact that there are so many people that aren't able to talk about it because they don't even know that that's what's happening. It's not validated for them, right? And that so much of that is also reflected in these sort of stereotypes and caricatures that dehumanize us regularly and live in the imaginations of people and have for decades or for centuries. So what we're going to look at is how serious this is, like what the effect of this sort of experience of kind of walking around with this fear and this terror and this anxiety, what it does to the body and why it is important to have this conversation. So this piece right here, I don't know if you all have heard of this term weathering. The first time I heard it, it took my breath away. And then of course I read it in Sara's thesis, but the first time I heard of this idea of weathering, I just like, it was about a woman who lost her child. After, she gave birth, and I think it was a few weeks later maybe, that her child passed away. And she actually did research for the CDC in Atlanta. She was what you consider to be middle class. She was educated. So all of these factors that we would think are kind of protective factors for the wellness and health of Black women are not necessarily. And this is what we're coming to understand. So it's really important to know that this is real. And I'm saying that in particular for people who are like, I don't know if I'm crazy or if this is real. And also for people who walk with us in this life to sort of understand this phenomenon. So we'll play the clip on weathering. Oh.
It's the focus. And so this week's segment, the leading edge.
Statistics are stunning. Black infants are more than twice as likely to die than white infants, a racial disparity that's wider today than in 1850, 15 years before the end of slavery. And black women are 3 to 4 times as likely to die from pregnancy-related causes than white women. For a closer look at what's behind those numbers, we turn now to Linda Villarosa. Her in-depth report on the subject ran in the New York Times Magazine, and used a couple of phrases in the report I'd love for you to explain: toxic stress and weathering. How do those work in the context of this conversation?
So when you hear the word stress, you kind of think of, oh, I feel really stressed out, or I just need to kind of take a chill pill or relax. But really, toxic stress is the result of aggressions that happen to you and insults that happen to you. And in this case, race-related, it can be everything from, I feel that I'm treated differently, people think I'm less intelligent, to I'm being discriminated against by the police in housing and in my workplace. And those actually, it's been proven that those have a physical effect on the body. Because every time you get stressed out in this way, and if it happens repeatedly, all of your systems fire up. And if your systems continually fire up, they break down. And weathering is the idea that your body, because of these repeated insults and this repeated firing of the system, the body ages prematurely. And so, and it's not on the outside, I mean it could be, but it's on the inside. And that all comes to a head during what is essentially a stress test of a woman's body, and that is pregnancy and childbirth.
Statistics are stunning. That's white and black women are 3 to 4.
So, do you want to talk about that? Stereotypes and sort of the caricatures and how these assumptions are connected to this experience of weathering and whether we care or not. That's specifically how this person sort of established us as being less than human.
Well, the thing that's interesting about, like, I call it caricature versus characters, because, like, coming from the perspective of a writer, there's a lot of blogs and stuff like that that talk about, we've seen enough of this character trope, like this type of character, this type of character. And as black people, and specifically black women, there's a lot of these established stereotypes and caricatures that we have to experience. Like, there's the sassy one, there's the mammy, there's the Jezebel, and all these kinds of things. And I was trying to explore this idea of black women not being able to embrace who they are because we've locked them into caricatures. Whether they fit the description or not, they don't have the freedom to be able to exist as what they want to be. And that carries over from Africa, because this was pulled from an MTV Decoded video, and the host was describing how when Europeans came to Africa and they saw how African people were dressing, they labeled them a certain way, and they were looking from their culture perspective and didn't have the decency to ask or understand that Africa was a different place and had a different culture and all that kind of stuff. And that continues today, and we see it in music videos and things like that, how black women are locked into these stereotypes, and they're not free to have their own identity, whatever that identity is. But,
yeah. Some years ago when I was working on a study at the College of Charleston, I was looking at sort of this idea of how we're constantly negotiating with the sort of prescriptives of the overculture, and also like these expectations of our own culture, and the ways that we are constantly shifting. Like, we're constantly putting on a different face for work, putting on a different face for home, putting on a different face for church, putting on a different face for the academy, like the ways that we're constantly engaged in this process to where it's almost unconscious, but how that also creates sort of this without losing, I'm using the word loosely, but this this interior kind of schizophrenic experience where we are in a constant state of anxiety and fear. And then the other thing about this is we know that statistically, we know that the data shows that our experiences with mental health illness, well, we're at more risk for mental health illness, but we also seek help less. And I like that you connect that to the fact that people in these particular institutions who have bought into these narratives and assumptions have particular ideas about us that don't, they keep them from servicing us properly, right? So there's these assumptions that Black women don't feel as much pain. There's data actually out there that Black women don't feel as much pain as white women, or Black girls don't feel as much pain as white girls. And so they're less likely to be cared for in a way that considers pain. And so, can you speak a little bit about that? This treatment.
The slide that was before that was about this European guy who basically created a racial hierarchy, and he looked at Africa, Asia, Europe, and the only group of people that he assigned characteristics to were African women. He looked at these other continents and didn't assign any characteristics to them. And the African women were greasy and full of caprice. I think is that how you pronounce it? Caprice. And which sort of that helped to justify the ways that they mistreated us and abused us during slavery. And the ideas that this racist person created millennia ago are employed in our medical institutions where we go and seek help. And I have had numerous encounters with medical professionals where it's very clear that they don't think I'm valuable, where I am preparing to go to the gynecologist and I put on a College of Charleston shirt because maybe if they know that I went to a college, they'll care a little more. And sometimes that works, but sometimes it doesn't. But learning that there was this history, the ways that during slavery, these doctors would experiment on enslaved women with no anesthesia to learn what we today know about the body. How these ideas still impact the care that we receive or, that we don't. And the point that Drew brought up, that we are at higher risk of experiencing mental health issues, but we're less likely to seek help, and we're less likely to receive it. So obviously, seeking help generally precedes receiving the help. But, how, and we're not even talking about perhaps the cultural stigma around mental health. That's another story. But if you have gotten out the box enough to go seek it, but you know that they think that you're not worth nothing, you might not go. And that's not just mental health, that's any kind of help that we would need because we're human beings who need help. We're less likely to receive it, less likely to seek it out.
Less likely to receive care. Like care, like compassion.
Absolutely.
Like, again, the way that these stereotypes sort of show up, like I can think about hearing comments like, you're strong, you've got this. You don't need to do this more than, twice a year. That kind of thing. Even from, my own, right? But like the way that these, and so we walk around sick. We walk around this crooked room, which we'll talk about next. When we internalize these ideas, we try to manage and do the same things that we all need to do to be here, right? Like go to work and wash my body and all of these other things, but at the same time we have this constant internalized violence.
And you internalize the idea that you're not worthy. Right. You're not worthy of care because they let you know that you're not. And so how do you combat that?
Right. Because living in this space is traumatic. Living in this culture is a trauma, right? And like you said, it's more about how experiencing trauma is about how our mind and our body responds to these experiences, these external sort of circumstances, consistently, right? So we're constantly moving through this trauma. It's a part of the way we are in the world. Yes.
Yeah, and so just last week, I think last Monday, I presented on this panel on race, gender, and medicine at the College of Charleston. I don't even know why they asked me to be on the panel because I don't feel like I don't feel like the panel topic was really rooted in understanding some of the main reasons why Black women in particular experience some of these dis-eases within the body. But I remember I talked a little bit, or one of the panelists talked a little bit about, you know, the rates of female women dying at birth, just infant mortality rates, and how those numbers have gone up in the last 50 years and how they're much higher now. And I remember mentioning something about Black midwives and thinking about Erykah Badu and how she's trying to, you know, pass on this kind of knowledge. And at the end of the talk, someone brought up to me that actually the rates of Black midwives, you know, delivering successful babies were higher than those who delivered in hospitals. And she's a historian, and I was like, wow, I didn't even know that. But that shows that there's this history of caring, compassion that is already, this knowledge that's already embedded within the community, and that's where we should go. And then kind of like in line with that, so recently I've been dealing with well, actually kind of thinking about that panel, we were talking about epigenetics, and I remember saying that, you know, there is this gene that is prominent in a lot of African Americans, which is the sickle cell gene. And actually, you know, geneticists have discovered that sickle cell gene was actually related to the gene that protected Africans from malaria when they were in, you know, in their native countries. And so I was wondering, you know, I gave a talk wondering what is it about the environment, whether it's stress, whether it's other physical factors, what is it about the environment that Black people are living in now that, you know, has taken this gene that was once designed to protect them and allowed them to, you know, keep their land sacred here. If we're thinking about the Gullah Geechee culture. What was it about it that has now turned this gene into something that kills them, literally? And I was like, you know, to me, it has to be something environmental or physical. And one of the panelists, you know, pulled me to the side and she was like, well, I just want you to know, you know, it really isn't, it really is genetics, because that gene is prominent in India as well. And it's really supposed to be this gene, this recessive gene that kind of like breeds out over time, like survival of the fittest. But because of the small selection of enslaved Black people who were here in the South, right? That gene was allowed to replicate. So when two people have the gene, instead of it like dying out because we're not supposed to be mating with each other, right? That gene ends up, you know, killing the body or hurting the body. And she was like, so it's not, you know, it is genetics. It's not environmental. And I'm looking at her thinking, yes, it is. You just proved to me that it was a system of oppression and slavery that, you know, designed this thing that killed Black people. And, you know, that's my way of thinking about, you know, health, because I'm not thinking about it from this very scientific way, even though I do think Afrofuturism is a science in a lot of ways. And then one final thing as it relates to just, you know, fitting yourself in these boxes and not being able to be as carefree and not being able to use your mind in the way that you know, being as free as you want to be, right? So there was a picture of Afrofuturist picture that I wanted to show, and it's this artistic rendering of a Black woman, and in her, like, you know, her hair is like flowers, but her mind is a spaceship. And that trope, that imagery of a spaceship, it appears in a lot of like funk and Afrofuturist music. Come Along With Me on This Fantastic Voyage, right? It's that spaceship, about being able to imagine. Your mind's literally a spaceship. If you think about how Afrofuturist or science fiction novels were saying that in 1960, 2020 would be the year in which we're all like driving spaceships, right? And here we are in 2020 or 2019, and we're still not as right. Now we're going to walk, being able to not have that fear in your body, so that you can mentally, you know, go wherever, travel the universe, right? And see yourself so that you can achieve that. And I was just thinking, I'm suffering from a lot of neck pain that I think is a result of my career. And the other day, I feel like I have it mostly intact. And the other day I was walking on campus and I saw a colleague, and my neck started hurting
hurting again. I was like, what? I hate this, my neck hurting. And I didn't feel any fear, I didn't feel any stress. And I was just, talking to her like I would talk to anybody else. And of course, as soon as I left, my neck stopped hurting. And I was like, in my mind, I'm trying to theorize, like, what could this mean? What just happened to me? And the only thing I can think is that I've gotten so used to performing that, performing, being in these spaces, that I just do it automatically. But there's this book called, The Body Keeps the Score. So even though mentally we can trick ourselves sometimes, the body always holds, or the body knows. And I'm, performing and trying to fit myself into this space and trying to, because I know she's not invested in me as a Black person, but I have to be in her world, right? Because she's not gonna really, she doesn't care to understand my word, nor does she have to understand it. So I go into this mode of performing, and every time I have to do that, my body, picks up some kind of stressor from doing that. And so I think, I don't even know where I was going at the end with all that, but these were just all the thoughts that were running through my mind as I saw all of those things coming back to me and thinking about something like Afrofuturism and just being able to be free and exist without or outside of these stereotypes without performing.
Yeah, and I think that I think that the fact that you brought up the body keeps the score is important, because it's also the body keeps the score, but our lineage keeps the score, right? So we're dealing with all of that at the same time, right? So that's a lot. That's a lot to carry. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Crooked Room, and I know we have we're making time for Q&A, so I want to try to be concise, but at the same time we had a lot to unpack. But I want to talk a little bit about this notion of a crooked room. Maybe we can see if that image, here we go. Melissa Harris Perry coined this this idea of the crooked room, and we're going to speak a little bit about how that ties into.
So it is I think it was a World War II field study where to test, what were they testing? It was a field study where they were testing to see if people could align themselves, how they might align themselves in a crooked room. So they would bring participants into a room that was entirely crooked with a crooked chair and tell them to stand upright. And the study shows that there would be people who were tilted up to 35 degrees who believed that they were standing upright in relation to this crooked room. There are some people who maybe managed to get kind of what we might think is vertical, but for the most part, folks aligned themselves with their surroundings, with the conditions. And Melissa talks about how this is the experience of Black women when we are in a white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist society that this society came after us, right? So we pre-existed this society. This society crafted itself as our enemy, not the other way around. But when we are seeking to survive, oftentimes we attempt to align ourselves with the crookedness. And that is often how we're moving through the world, and we don't even know the room is crooked. And you don't have to be in some kind of formal education setting to get that information, but I can say that that's where I got a lot of analysis. If not, there are certainly other ways to get it. You live it, we live it. But to have the language to say, oh, it's not me, this room is crooked. It's not me that's tripping. It's not me that's wrong. It's not me that just can't get right. It's the room that in fact came after us because we pre-existed. And so that is actually a part of the reason that I titled the thesis, Come On in the Room, because I wanted to imagine a room of safety. I wanted to imagine this open space where we could be in alignment with our divinity and our highest truths, in contrast to this crooked room that we didn't ask to be in. And honestly, ain't nobody in here asked to be in it, right? But, you know, each of us in here have different investments. Each of us in here are complicit in different ways in upholding this crooked wrong. And what would it look like to dispel it? We're trying to align ourselves with a lie.
Thank you. So what if we could heal backwards? And that's what this work suggests and offers, and I believe it. We have some slides next that are going to sort of show you and share with you the ways that some other folks have created ways to move through and heal through this reality. This is Jessica's work right here. Jessica, if you want to speak to where this piece comes from.
Okay, so I was really inspired by this song that was in the album for Spider-Man Into the Multiverse, actually. It was a song called Let Go by Bo Young Prince, I think that's his name. And the whole notion of the song was that someone is just really overwhelmed by life. And the lyrics are like, I don't really know myself, devil on my back, pray for me, need help, angel in the front trying to guide my steps, who do you call when you need some help? It's just basically this whole tailspin of like life just falling apart around you. And the chorus was, I just want to let go. And that was just repeated over and over. And I thought of this idea of this space, like this abstracted place that wasn't a place at the same time called the let go. And so I just imagined this black girl floating through the let go, healing as she needed to. And it's kind of a cross-reference of like all different kinds of things I was inspired by. Because like in Octavia Butler's book, Kindred, the character Dana is like picked up from where she is by some force. We don't know what it is, but she's picked up and she's put back into slavery time. And I imagine that this girl was like walking around like how we are in this world, and she was put into this abstract space to heal. And I don't really know all the answers around all of that, but I just call this space the let go. And I was just inspired by like this idea of like being pulled into this space where your purpose is to like look into other worlds, look into yourself and different versions of yourself, and to just heal. So that was what I was trying to do.
So Sara shared this. This is Alexis Pauline Gum. You want to speak about?
She did a whole series called the Black Feminist Breathing Chorus, I believe, where she looked at several different black feminists. So they were both women and queer men throughout history, and she interpreted their work and their ideology in collage form. And so Alexis Pauline Gum is an extraordinary Afrofuturist and an excellent writer, and everybody should read her work. But this pick is cool because, like I said, I'm a podcast junkie. So on an episode of End of the World, How to Survive the End of the World, Alexis Pauline Gum talks about this. She talks about healing forwards and healing backwards, and how her father told her once, you know, I'm so proud of you navigating this particular issue, like learning how to say no. You know, I'm so proud of you for doing this because, you know, I could never do it and my dad could never do it, but you doing it is helping us. You doing it is transforming us. And she talked about how Harriet Tubman was one, you know, Harriet Tubman survived that traumatic brain injury where a white person was throwing some kind of weight at another enslaved person, and it hit Harriet Tubman. This was, she was like a young girl, an enslaved girl. And it caused her to have mental illness, in part, I think, narcolepsy? Yeah, narcolepsy. So essentially she was a disabled woman, but obviously we know that did not stop her. And Alexis Pauline Gum talks about how Harriet Tubman, Elisa was just talking about, Harriet Tubman was able to imagine and manifest her freedom in the middle of slavery. And not only did she believe in her freedom so strongly that she freed herself, she went back and got more people. She believed in our freedom during slavery and said, nah, well, this is not it. And what Alexis was talking about was the possibility that the traumatic brain injury, and she's just, considering that this injury opened up a portal. And she said, what if Harriet Tubman was accessing us? What if she believed in her freedom so strongly because of us? Because we're free here. And kindred is so incredibly important because on my second read, the character Dana, she goes back in time from the 1980s to the 1800s, and she's on the plantation with her enslaved ancestor and her ancestor who was a slave owner. And she quickly realizes that she needs to at least survive and ensure that these ancestors survive long enough for the birth of her known ancestor. So she knows that there is an ancestor that is free because there's a Bible in her family, and Hagar has recorded the family history. And Hagar is the ancestor that she knows she has to survive to ensure is born. And so throughout the book, one of the things she does is convince or influence her slave master ancestor to free his children. And on the second or third read, I was like, oh my God, what if they were only free because of her? She didn't go back in time. It was all the same thing. Hagar is free because of the descendant. That's how it always worked. It wasn't that it happened some other way and then Dana just went backwards, and that's why Hagar was free. Hagar was free because of her 1980 great-great-great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter who talked to her slave master father and said, this is what you should do. And so this idea of healing backwards, that the liberation of that family depended on the descendant, which is also really what Coco is about, if you think about it. And, so that's what I think about.
Yeah.
Coco is amazing, and it's a lot like Kindred. Not as morbid, but very similar to Kindred.
Thank you. We're just going to roll through a couple of other things. I wanted to get to the video, Wangichi. Yes, and I would like to share that and speak to it, and then we're going to shift to Q&A, just to keep on time. That's it. Here we are.
Do you want me to introduce it first?
Yeah, so let's pause it.
Okay, so I want to introduce it because I played it in my AfroFuturism class, which had it wasn't all black students, and after I played it, one of my white male students freaked out and was like, what is that? That's demonic. What is it? I don't want to see this. I have goosebumps and all this stuff. And so, just to protect you all, I'll give a little bit of trigger warning, right? Yeah, just so you don't trigger anyone in this room. Triggers. So Wangichi Mutu is an African visual digital artist. I think she's from Kenya, I can't remember, but she had this exhibit at Duke University back in 2013, 2014 called The End of Eating Everything. And what she was trying to do was talk about how blackness, particularly black women, are consumed in this country, right? Like everything from the way you dress, to your creativity, to your language, your style, like how there's always this consumption of black women going on. And so she was like, she's gonna put an end to that. And she's going to show a black woman, consuming things. And so this is her rendition of it. And she also, part of her appeal as a visual artist, she says, is she wants to make what we consider grotesque or ugly, she wants to make that art. And so this is her representation of a black woman who is in this space eating.
and there's no words to it. And so, I mean, AfroFuturism, I think, in analyzing something like this is based upon, you know, what meaning you draw from it. One of the things that, in having a student respond to that, I wanted to ask them, why did it make you feel uncomfortable? Why did seeing this representation that's clearly on the screen, right? It's not physically attacking you, and that you know is this woman or this black woman, you know, I guess with tentacles. Why is it this act of eating birds or nature problematic? Why does that conjure up in you some kind of sense of uncomfortable, not being comforted when this is the thing that we do often, which is consume other, and what I mean by that, so, and I keep going back to teaching, I'm so sorry, but in one of my classes, they have presentations that they have to do, and they have to do a lyrical analysis, and I'm only teaching one black student this semester, and it's interesting that out of all of their presentations, like I would say 8 out of 10 of those presentations were on rap music or R&B, like, you know, it was this act of, like, you know, being fascinated and entranced by black culture. But when I talk about social justice or when I talk about racism at the front of the class, they're looking at me like, or they're writing in my reviews, she talks about race too much. But your whole world is racialized. Like, that's what you know, you're a part of. And I can't be mad, I guess, because I understand that we, as, like you said, we're accountable in some of this, right? We don't value our own culture enough. But I think someone like Lowcountry needs to ask us to figure out what makes us feel uncomfortable about watching something like that.
You can roll through. Okay. So, now it's time for questions. Excuse me. going to take one of the mics around, or do we need it? Okay, perfect. All right, so yes, use your voices. So we're going to take a little bit of time, 10 minutes or so, to ask questions, have a little Q&A. So
hi, my name is Alex. I'm a med student at UNC, and I just wanted to thank y'all so much for spreading that knowledge about epigenetics, because that's why I'm going into medicine, so that I can be at least one person who stops that changing of our genes and tries to address that. So I'm a med student, but I came from an African States background, so this is like right up my alley. I'm so glad I came tonight. Regarding Kindred, which is one of my favorite books, what do you make of, I don't want to give the ending away in case people haven't read it, but the fact that Dana leaves something in the past. What do you make of that ending, and what does it say about healing and how we move forward?
So I guess we're not giving ending away, so I'll just be, she leaves a part of herself behind. But for me, that is, and when I analyze or read that book, to me it's just life, right? Like we're always leaving remnants of ourselves. In this particular case, it was literally a physical part of her that she left behind. And I think when I think about what healing looks like, there's this book that I was reading that says that every time we have or experience a traumatic incident, like parts of our souls become fragmented. We leave our souls in those parts. But we also have to realize, like, this is just, like, our bodies are just temporary, right? Like, it's our souls. It's really what gives us meaning in this life. And so, even though she left that part of her behind, she can still become whole by calling her soul back, or by, you know, understanding the significance of that event in that moment. So I think there's a lot of ways to make sense of what happens. That's my personal take on it, and I always open it up for other people to, like, I don't think there's any right or wrong way to interpret something like that.
If I could just speak on that too. I understand what you're saying, but my opinion on that thing that she left behind speaks to trauma, because even though she can heal and become her whole self again, she always has that reminder that there's a piece of her that's fragmented. So that's just my opinion.
It serves as a physical reminder. And so I remember one time I also taught the course, in addition to my AfroFuturism course, I taught it in like a self and identity in African American literature. And I have my students, because Afrofuturism in a lot of ways takes in the physical and the built environment, but it's also about like, how do you map yourself into a space that many map makers have left out as black, right? Like you don't know that a lot of times these spaces are black when you look at a map. And so I had them create different maps, but they had to create analog maps. They couldn't use any digital tools or Google Fusion or GIS mapping techniques. And one group did a representation of Dana in Kindred, and they used words to draw her body, because they were saying that like her body, different parts of her body reminded her of a physical or violent encounter that she had either with a slave master or in her voyage back into. And so I remember they constructed that physical part of her that she lost using words, because they're saying, like, you know, literally she remembers this in her mind through the act of, I don't know, recalling an event and thinking about it using words. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for very powerful presentations. I'm just curious, because you each are so well informed, what one meaningful thing did you gather from this presentation, from the others? One thing meaningful that you gathered from tonight's presentation, from the others, as opposed to what you shared.
Well, I mean, every single time I sit and cipher with all three of the people up here, I'm learning. From Sara, I have learned that it's really okay to do this kind of work that is so subjective. And not only is it okay to do it, but it's really important. From Lisa, I've learned that the academic voice of a professor is important as a part of our community, because you're in this space that so very few are afforded entry to. From Jessica, I have learned that the sky is the limit. I mean, Jessica is a senior in college finishing a novel. It's AfroFuturism. And I've also learned, and I know this, but I've also learned that these cross-generational collaborations are so important, because we really are learning and teaching each other and creating something new together all the time. Do you want us to move down the line?
Yeah, just one.
Just one?
Yeah, just one.
I'm like, yeah.
But get to the test. Just one thing from this evening that others have said.
What did you learn?
So the thing for me that is just that this was really affirming, especially working with y'all, because I don't know, I felt so alone. You feel like you're in your head a lot, and I'm an introverted person, so I'm really in my head a lot. But so I mean, from when we first met and we all sat down and talked, and reading your paper, taking class with you pulling all of us together and everything, it just made me feel like I'm not crazy, for one thing, and that I'm not alone, and that I could sit and talk about people who weren't afraid to have the conversation, and it was like such a relief. So that's what I got from this event.
Kind of like echoing both of them. Like when I first read Sara's thesis, I think I was blown away because she used the term retroactive, you know, Afrofuturism as a retroactive form of Black women's healing. And I was like, wow, I know that we definitely need to heal our past and our traumas, but I didn't realize how so many things that I had been thinking about or interested in were actually parts of a whole. And reading her thesis brought so many things together, whether it's Nina Timon, whether it's the activism that we do, whether it's epigenetics, whether it's Afrofuturism, it just tied everything together. And I think the reason why we're interested in having a dialogue is because we, you know, and why I was telling Drew earlier, like I couldn't imagine having done this with anybody else, because they're so supportive and like we get each other in a lot of ways. We are alike, but I'm always learning, I'm always picking up something from each of them. And I think the dialogue and the talk back is really what gives me, or what will give me the, I don't know, even more insight and help me to better understand, because we each bring something new to the table, and community is important. I would say from this evening, a collaboration of what they've all said. I often harken back to the Comedy River Collective and their Comedy River Collective statement, and they talk about, these are Black feminist lesbians who came together in '74, and they called what they were doing consciousness raising. And essentially how I understood consciousness raising is they got together and they shared and they validated and they affirmed their subjective experience. And I, too, this evening just recognized the power in affirming our objective experience, not just in how empowered I feel to share it with folks who are receiving it and to hear similarities and get understanding from others, but just the audience response to the things that we were sharing was like, oh, you know, we talking about the same thing, we're feeling the same thing, and our subjective experience, we matter, you know, we have value, and when we can get outside the foolishness and say, hey, I'm hurt, and you can say, I'm hurt too. And y'all gonna be like, hell yeah, we hurt too. What we gonna do? And so I received that this evening.
We'll go here, and then we'll go.
So again, thank you guys for coming out. I really learned a lot from your thesis, and I'm trying to write a paper about just minimizing that stress's effect on our physical bodies, and I was wondering if you had any suggestions or resources that I could look into.
I actually presented a piece at the National Women's Studies Association conference last year about Black women's radical peace being Afrofuturism in praxis. And in part, it was based on this Malidoma Somé quote. Malidoma Somé is a West African shaman and healer and scholar. And in a documentary called Sara, it's about intuition, it's on Netflix. He said that our intuition is the platform where our past, present, and future meet. And that blew my mind. And so the paper and the presentation was about this idea that to get to radical peace, we have to be present. Because when we practice presence, we actually have access to all the timelines. You know, we can get caught up living in the past or in regret and guilt and shame or fear of the future. But in the present, we have access to all that we need. So I talked about mindfulness practices, like, and mindfulness not being this sort of abstract thing that you can't do, or it has to be sitting still and, you know, silencing your mind or whatever, that there are all these ways to practice mindfulness, whether it be like cooking or washing dishes or gardening or double dutch or yoga or, you know, writing, meditating, all of the above. And I chose radical peace because Fannie Lou Hamer and Angela Davis described radical as getting to the root. I looked up once a definition of peace, and it was softening all that is rigid inside of our hearts. That peace was softening all that was rigid inside of our hearts. And I imagined that radically, getting to the root, perhaps, if we soften all that is rigid in our hearts, we would get to the root. And perhaps what is at the root of our hearts is creation. This divine creation that we all have access to. But when we're all over the place and in our head and we're terrified and we're stressed, we don't remember to tap into what we already have. The healing and the wholeness that we already have. So I think mindfulness is incredibly important because in terms of accessible ways of managing stress, and that was what I was going for, something that we can all engage with. If you don't have health insurance, you know, if you don't have a way to seek medical help, and you might have a way, they might treat you better. So, you know, what are you going to do with what you have? And that's what I was doing. So I hope that's a little bit of it.
Yes, thank you.
Another question?
There was a historic trauma or affirmation that you could travel to and witness or intervene. What would that possibly be?
Could you say that one more time, please?
If there was a historical moment of affirmation or trauma that you could witness or intervene in, what would it be?
The first thing that came to my head was Evo Landing, which is where the enslaved Africans were taken off the ship in Georgia. And they looked around and again they said, nah. And the story has it that they walked back into the ocean, hands held in chains, and said, we're going to take this instead. And not to intervene, but perhaps to witness something like that, to witness that type of defiance, that type of I'm opting out. Right. Because, you know, there are some of us who will say very ridiculous things like, you know, I'm not my ancestors, you can get these hands or whatever. Like, we don't have no idea the decisions and the sacrifices that they made and the ways that they chose to opt out or not. And we think about systems and things that we are complicit in when we're all here and we're upholding and perpetuating this system that oppresses all of us. I think, I can't imagine the energy and power it would feel to witness something like that. Just, yeah.
Thanks. I commend you for this evening's activity. You know, the future is past, and you know, the ancestors is so embedded in the discussion that we're having this evening. The work of the ancestors, what the ancestors have preserved for us, what they left behind for us that we have not noticed. They left lots of things behind for us. Recently, in 2013, they rose up out of the grave at the Gilead Auditorium. They stopped being silenced at the Gilead Auditorium, rose up so that they could be heard. So on the 3rd of May, 4th of May, where we reinterred those bones back into the ground of the ancestors. But what those bones coming out of the ground did was create an opportunity for us to do DNA here locally. Many of us came out and we did DNA. And this evening, I learned from your mother, who is the mother of my student, who I love. We learned that we're family. She did her DNA, and Philip Simmons came up in her DNA. You know, so you know, it explains why, from the moment that we met, right? From the moment that our families met, we've been connected. So I'm saying that this work that we're doing, our ancestors, they are intentionally bringing us back together. Intentionally. And we need to acknowledge that, we need to know that, and we need to vigilantly participate in that. Vigilantly participate in that, because they are our salvation. Not anything else that anybody else promised us. Our ancestors are our salvation. Their past is our future.
How can we support your work and create inclusive communal spaces surrounding these concepts in a digestible and accessible way for all Black women and femme folk, from the academic to the hood rat, hood feminist, womanist, while also protecting and maintaining the integrity of the concept?
So it would be incredible to have other women women like this would want to hear what you had to offer. And I don't want to scoot by for free.
I hear you.
Well, one thing that I'm doing is recording the short stories that I wrote in my thesis. So I included Afrofuturist fiction as an example of the healing work that I was talking about, and I'm recording them for sale. So I would love if you would buy the short stories. Yes, so you will see that soon in the email.
Yeah.
That we have. So that is one way.
And are you and Drew to do the podcast?
Oh no. No, it's another friend.
No, it sounds like a great idea.
Yeah. We'll see what comes of it. I'm just, like I said, astounded and deeply grateful. Your turnout reflects the fact that we're all ready to have these conversations and do this
kind of work together. So the last portion of this is just, we're engaging in dialogue, but I have some very specific questions. Would love to hear back from you. So I'm just going to ask the question that you can jump in. So the first question is, what are you feeling right now?
I've often said that hope is my religion, and that I practice it intentionally because sometimes I see nothing for which to be hopeful. But I know that if my ancestors had not been, I would not be. Tonight, my hope is not just dramatic. It's very real. I'm so excited. I'm so pleased when I see. You know, I'm old, and I see younger women doing this type of powerful healing work that when I was your age, I could not conceive of doing. So I have this wonderful sense of hope. It's hard work, you know, and you're not walking into this with some sort of idea, this will be easy. You know it's hard work. And yet you are willing to tackle this and do this in ways that we were not aware were accessible to us at one time. So that's how I feel.
Yes.
I honestly feel enlightened. Every time Sara and I have a conversation, you know, I feel like I learned something. I told you that years ago. But I really feel enlightened and empowered and not alone.
I feel a sense of pride. I feel a sense as like my first week at Hampton University, I got from Beaufort, and there were these people who they wanted to speak important things and talk about it. And I had found at that time there were these ideas and these subjects that among my peers in Beaufort, they didn't want to hear it, they didn't want to do anything about it. There were other things they were interested in. So as I shared in this with you, I felt a sense of pride. Thank you.
I feel like I've been anointed. I mean, by your wisdom, by your words. I also feel like mentality. So you see, from the morning,
With all of this talk of ancestry and looking to the past, what do you make of that idea? What do you make of this idea that we could heal retroactively?
It helps me to fully understand that Black people, and Black women in particular, are godly. And that our abilities are limitless. And that the more that we build community, the more we get in touch with that power and that root magic and that wisdom. And additionally, the resistance, the feeling of resistance, specifically, this is my first time in Charleston, that I feel here is overwhelming. And so it just reiterates the godliness that we all have.
That's it.
I just want to say real quick that this is Sydney, and she's the co-host of We See You Sis podcast that everybody should check out. And she drove from Charlotte to be here.
Anyone else?
I think DNA is important. I think that is my question. In that it assisted me in connecting with my dad, you know, who I was always introduced as this is supposed to be his daughter. So ancestry, DNA, all of that is extremely important. And in our communities, we have a lot of missing links, you know, as it relates to who our really fathers are and things like that. So in taking the DNA test, it has now connected me to other people in other parts of the country. And I think that's fascinating. And I'm hopeful, I'm excited, I'm just grateful for what you ladies are doing. It's just tremendous. And I'm learning, I learned so much today, this evening, that I'm just really thrilled and honored to be a part of this, and I want to be a part of anything else, everything else that you have to come. Thank you.
You know, she just gave me my segue, right? Connecting the dots across the diaspora. I'm British born of Jamaican heritage, living where? In the Lowcountry, Gullah Geechee Nation. I came here for the weather, but I also came for the root. This is one of the few places in these United States of America where I can touch, feel, see, smell, and experience Africa. Now, there are many who, yes, they get to go to Africa straight. No, I got to go to Jamaica first, take that bend, but the kicker is the rhythms, the flow, the language. They're saying, how are we doing retroactive healing? Let us hear some drums more. Know how to respond to them. Because when you look at those who the boats went other ways, you drop a Puerto Rican beat, you drop a Dominican beat, you drop a Haitian beat, you drop a Jamaican beat, they recognize who they are and what their baseline is. I think part of what I end up doing here, because I can't help it, I am partial to the Lowcountry clap, because it's one of the few things that unifies wherever I go in the Lowcountry. And that's all I keep seeking, because you do have a chord. You know I'm ready for it. Come on now, Charleston. All y'all here. Come on, ladies, y'all know. Ow! And it ain't just female. Look at that. Look at that. Don't no other place do that. Oh, that's where I live in. Yeah. The past is the future. You run tell that way. No, that's why I stick it on everything. I had pictures of all the 54 flags of the African nations, and what did I stick behind it? The Lowcountry clap.
We don't need no words. We got clap.
That's it. That's it. And I got my Instagram. I got it.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, man.
They're gonna go do what they gonna do.
We've come to a solid end of again, I want to thank you all for being out here. I'm so grateful that you're here. I also have some formal thank yous that I must definitely articulate, and one is to Dee Shanti. Dee, where you at?
Hey, oh, there she is behind you.
You know, that's love in action. You know, when someone says, I have this skill set, I can help you and I will. So thank you for being here. The same thing with the Transformative Teaching Collective. They are in the house, and you can stand up. Thank you for the drinks, and thank you for the forever support. Also, I want to thank Cheryl, who I just met tonight, who brought amazing cakes.
Yes! Yes! Oh, that red velvet.
Again, love in action, this like affirmative nod, right? Like, oh, how are we going to do this? And then all of these things show up and it comes together and it's just beautiful.
I just wanted to say this.
Send that clap out to the world, bro.
with healing. It's healing. You know, it's a thing you say about doctors. I know when I went to the doctor, if I had listened, I would not have already had my surgery. They wanted me to come back in 6 months. But I'm a nurse. But not only that, you have to assert yourself and never be afraid. Go with that inner voice. The inner voice that tells you, and speak up. You know, even if you don't have the words for what it is that you're supposed to be speaking up for, just speak up.
I want to thank, I'm sorry, I want to thank Smarell of Dell's. They brought out the vegan pizza and the salsa and the hummus, and literally she hit me up like, so, just want to let you know I'm trying to sponsor. So again, just all this love, like she's ill tonight or she would be here, but she made sure that we had amazing food to sustain us for this time together. And then I want to thank Empress and Indigo, who I don't know where they are, but they showed up. And then last but 100% not least, because this would be nothing happening at all were it not for the three of you. So I thank you for showing up at your time, and I mean seriously, like, just so grateful to be with y'all.
Can we also say thank you to each of you for coming out, because we were blown away by the number of people who we thought it was going to be small and intimate, especially when you use the terminology like healing. At least in my personal experience, healing is, synonymous with, God, either God completely healed us, or it's, the medical version of curing, right? Like we're either synonymous with those two words in very disparate senses. And I wasn't quite sure if it would be, the title, who would be legible to, but clearly this resonated on some level. And one of the things, going back to the question your dad asked, one of the things that I also learned from your thesis is thinking about Charleston as this space of magic, not just New Orleans, right, but how this access to a port created and invited in this ancestral presence that we, to this day, are still surrounded by. So thank you all for being a part of it. It warms our heart.
Oh, and then of course Redux.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I learned? One of the biggest things I learned is, and a girlfriend used to say this to me, to ask is the task. Like, just ask. Like, just do it. Because you never know what's there, And this is a reflection of the fact that, like, there's plenty for all of us if we would just only ask. Consider ourselves worthy enough.
Yes.
Right? Worthy enough to manifest these things and be a part of these things. And, right? Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, ma'am. That's the only place. I mean, in terms of, they can go to other points, but I'm not a Virginia person, I don't think. I needed it here. It worked for me. did Ecuador twice last year, so now it's time to play. But you will find them here though. You making me work and things. You really can't find what's going on? That's futuristic stuff. She got some strong tones. Oh yes. Think you can have red velvet too. Go ahead, man. Go ahead, man. Listen, I'm